Welcome back. Here's a cool image. This is a pioneer motorist. His name is Ernest Edward Wagstaff, standing beside a 28 horsepower Daimler in 1908 with what looks like two guys whose job it is to keep the thing going. This is a gelatin silver print, and again it comes from the State Library of Victoria's copyright-free photo archive. So the first thing I want to do is balance out the luminance of the image. You can see there's a gutter of sort of less contrast, a vertical kind of stripe in the center of the frame. And so generating a levels adjustment layer and putting a gradient tool into the mask of that layer, I can play with the luminance by sliding the levels up and down and try and work out how I can best adjust against that sort of flatness in tone. Now it's getting a little hard to see because the original sepia color of the image is becoming richer as I grade it. So what I do is put a hue saturation layer above that and desaturate the image so that I can really just assess it in terms of black and white tone. So that's certainly helpful. Now I'm going to work a little differently on this image. There's already not that much dirt on it, so I'm going to go straight to neural filters and go to the photo restoration tab and process the image and see if I get any benefit from that. And as you can see, I certainly do. It takes a lot of the grain out of the image, flattens out some of the tone, and certainly helps the image read a little clearer. Also today I'm going to try something different. I have recently bought Topaz Sharpen AI from Topaz Labs, and you can go to it straight from Photoshop with your layer, and just leaving it on its automatic settings, you can see that it's brought a fair degree of sharpness to the image, which is really great. Now back in Photoshop, you can sort of see when I toggle on and off, the chrome and all the fixtures on the vehicle certainly pop a lot sharper, even looking at these chains on the back. Now sharpening's not to everybody's taste, but I think on an object like this car it really does help just to bring a little bit more clarity to the image. What I do notice, however, is that all of the faces have this kind of dottiness. He's almost got like a mask on. You can see there's a straight line through his jaw. It doesn't exist anywhere else in the image but on the faces of the men. But I'll deal with that later. The next thing to do is to select the remove tool and now start working my way across the image, removing any blemishes, any dots, spots, hairs, anything that might be left on the image. I think this picture's in such good shape because it was scanned in its original frame, and I think it's been protected for its life in that frame, which is really great. It makes my life a lot easier. Now this little piece of footage has been sped up to 300% just to get through the cleanup a little faster. But while that's happening, I can tell you that Ernest Edward Wagstaff drove from Melbourne to Sydney in 1901. At that time there were no paved roads. Very few people made that journey along the rutted tracks in a vehicle. Then in 1908 he drove this Daimler through the 90-mile desert in South Australia, which was mostly sand and pretty inhospitable at the time. Probably why there are chains on the vehicle. He lived in Toorak and in Kew in Melbourne, and he died without any family. He left his money to his nieces back in England with the understanding that when they passed away, his estate was to be passed on to the Victorian Eye and Ear Hospital, as well as the Royal Victorian Institute for the Blind. And when they finally passed away and his estate was handed across, it was $11 million. Alright, so that's pretty clean now, but it is on a bit of a tilt. So using the ruler tool, I'll try and describe a vague horizon line that I think is roughly right, and click on the straighten layer option up the top there on the toolbar, and that'll straighten the layer. Now I'll turn off the bottom layer, and you can see those little wedges of loss, top, bottom, left and right. So using a lassoed select, I will select these and restore them with generative fill. Now when the little menu has gone from the bottom of the frame where it normally hovers, you can find it under Window, right down the bottom, Contextual Fill Layer, and then use generative fill to basically rebuild or try to rebuild those missing parts of the image. The sky is pretty simple, and as usual it gives you 3 choices once it's done. I've sped this up slightly as well. Sometimes the generative fill can take a little time. So I can toggle through the options. I like that version of the wall. This floor should be pretty simple. And now we'll have a little play with this edge. The thing I'm actually going to be most mindful of is that engineer or whoever's elbow. It's very, very close to the edge of the frame. So when I make a choice, I'll probably make sure to pick something where he has a more natural looking elbow, like this one. And I'll collapse those layers down because I'm pretty happy with that. Now I still feel there's a little lack of contrast in the image. So I'm going to add a brightness contrast layer. And set the mask to black. Then with a big white paintbrush, I can paint in that mask and reveal areas of the image that I want to have that contrast adjustment. So I'm happy with that. Now I'm going to address the dotty faces. I have no idea why that's the case, but I'm going to use the heel brush tool, which samples texture from somewhere else in the image like that and uses it to replace the area under the brush with a similar luminance of the original image underneath the brush. So if I paint on his cheek here, I'm getting the tone of his cheek, but the texture of the sky, which is much nicer than, say, painting with a flat colored brush. You'll see that I think it's getting a bit blurry. So what I'm going to do is undo all of those brush strokes. And I think what I'll do is build a new layer. And then I will do the repair on that layer so I can mix it back slightly. And you'll see the benefit of that in a minute. See, he's looking quite airbrushed, which is something I don't really want. So now that I've got that done, I can go up to the opacity slider and start sliding that back to allow some of that original texture of the skin to shine underneath a little bit. So they look a little less airbrushed and a little bit more sympathetic with the original image. But this guy's still got a bit of a weird line there. I'm not quite sure, so I'm just going to paint that away. Of course, zoomed out, you don't see any of that, but it's very nice to know that you've got that those issues addressed. And there's another one done. The original and the cleanup. Once again, like and subscribe if you can. But I hope you enjoyed that, and I'll see you next time. Thank you.